18-year-old Nia Wilson spent the day with her sisters at a family party, then they got on the train to go home, and within minutes, her life was over. The problem is that this was not some random moment of chaos that came out of nowhere. The man who killed Nia had a violent history, documented psychiatric conditions, prior threats, prior arrests, and multiple warning signs that had already put him on law enforcement's radar. That's what makes today's case so haunting. When you lay out the entire timeline piece by piece, it starts to feel less like an unavoidable tragedy and more like a catastrophic failure at every level. In today's video, you'll learn how a young woman with her whole life ahead of her was taken in one of the most brutal and preventable attacks the Bay Area has ever seen. Welcome to the True Crime Nurse, everybody. My name is Kat, and I'm a registered nurse who loves all things nursing and true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell before you go. All right, friends, let's get into today's case. Nia Imani Wilson was born on November 12, 1999, as the youngest girl in her family to Ansar Al-Muhammad and Alicia Grayson. She was born and raised in Oakland, California, which is in Northern California, and it is absolutely stunning there. Oakland is known for its beautiful coastline, rich history, and delicious food, but it's mostly known as simply the Bay Area. Nia's large, close-knit family loved her fiercely. She was the youngest of all of her sisters, and they all said that she was the it girl. Everyone that knew Nia said the same things about her. She was the sweetest person on earth, and she never did anything bad to anybody. Her nickname was PG, which was short for pretty girl, because she was absolutely beautiful. Her nickname could not have been more fitting for her. Nia loved fashion, a cute crop top, makeup, music, and rapping, which she did with her sister Tashaya. Her siblings and her cousins were some of her very best friends, and they were inseparable for all of her life. She had a creative streak through rapping, but she also dreamt of becoming a lawyer someday, or she at least wanted to work somewhere in the criminal justice system. Nia also is passionate about dancing, so she talked about also wanting to open up a dance studio someday and launch a makeup line. So, at only 18 years old, she had a long laundry list of dreams that she wanted to pursue, and the whole world was waiting to see what she would accomplish someday. Nia was on track to graduate with honors from Dewey Academy, which is an Oakland continuation school, but heartbreakingly, she would never get to walk across that stage or turn her tassel. In 2016, 2 years before Nia's life was taken, she attended a vigil for her late boyfriend and his best friend who both drowned at a reservoir. At that vigil, there was a crowd of about 3,000 people, but then shots suddenly rang out. A 16-year-old girl named Regina Jeffries was struck in the neck and fell immediately. Nia was standing right next to her. Nia didn't run, but instead she sat there and stayed with that girl, holding her until medical help arrived. That's the kind of person she was, and she was only 16. At the time of her death, she may have only been 18 years old, but she already knew how to show up for people in the darkest moments of their lives, so she was wise well beyond her years. July 22nd, 2018 was a Sunday. 3 of the Wilson sisters, Nia, Latifah, and Tashaya, had spent the day in Concord at their aunt's house for a family party. It was a beautiful summer day, and there was all kinds of delicious food, good music, and laughter with their family. But the day was also emotionally heavy too, because this was actually Nia's late boyfriend's birthday. As the party wound down that evening, the 3 sisters headed to the Concord BART station to ride back to Oakland, which is the way that millions of Bay Area residents travel every day. Even though most don't have any problems, in less than a month before this day, 10 different people had been attacked. Many of those victims had passed away, so violence in that area is known to be a problem, especially on the transit system. Despite the danger and Nia's own apprehensions, the girls were tired, so they decided to head home on the BART. Nia texted her dad right before they boarded, like she always did in true daddy's girl fashion. What the Wilson sisters did not know was that a man named John Lee Cowell was watching them from the moment that they entered the Concord BART station. But before we talk about what happened next, we need to talk about this man for a moment. John Lee Cowell was 27 years old, and he stood at about 5 feet 8 inches tall. He was raised primarily in Concord, California, which is the same city where the Wilson sisters had been visiting with their family that night. He was homeless. He was also on parole and had been released from custody only 75 days before today's story takes place. His criminal history started the moment that he became an adult. In 2009, at only 18, Cowell was arrested for felony assault after he allegedly beat a man and sucker punched the man's daughter right outside of their home. That led to him being put on probation. By 2012, he had a felony conviction for an assault with a deadly weapon, and by 2013, he got another battery conviction for beating someone almost to death in Walnut Creek. In 2015, he was sentenced to 90 days in jail for being under the influence of drugs as well. So, as you can see, his history with violence was extensive, and now we're adding in substances after quite a few years in and out of jail. Then in 2016, things escalated even further. He walked into a Lucky grocery store at El Cerrito Plaza, stole merchandise, and when a security guard confronted him, he brandished both a fake gun and a box cutter knife and then threatened the guard with them both. He was arrested at El Cerrito BART station, and then he was convicted of second-degree robbery and sentenced to 2 years in state prison in October of 2016. But the courts were not the only ones that were keeping tabs on Cowell. In 2015, a woman in Concord filed a restraining order against him. The following year, Kaiser Hospital in Richmond filed one as well, stating that Cowell had made repeated threats against the hospital staff there. His own family members had restraining orders against him for their own protection, too. Cowell had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. He had served part of his prison sentence at the state hospital in California, at a facility designed to treat mentally ill prisoners. On May 8, 2018, he was released and paroled directly from that psychiatric facility, but he had no stable housing, no treatment plan, and nowhere structured to go. This was clearly not a safe discharge. His own family said, quote, "When he was released from the state mental facility, there was no place for him to go, with most of the mental institutions being shut down. Knowing that he was diagnosed with being bipolar and schizophrenia, the system has failed in this instance," end quote. They acknowledged that family members had been taking out restraining orders against him too, and that he had been living on the streets without treatment for quite some time when this incident occurred. Think about that for a second. His own family was so afraid of what he was capable of that they had to put restraining orders on him as well. Just 4 days before today's case took place, on July 18, 2018, John Cowell was confronted by BART officers for not paying for his fare from when he had ridden it before. This was in person, so officers already knew his face well. They didn't ban him though, so he was allowed back on the BART just 4 days later. Even more alarming is that 2 weeks before this incident, Cowell had allegedly threatened 2 different BART passengers. At the time, no BART employees were available to take a report about what happened, though, so he slipped right through the cracks again. Those threats went undocumented and unaddressed. So, in the weeks before July 22nd, we have several concerning examples of his behavior on BART with no follow through, and a man whose behavior was escalating without anyone in authority stopping it. Now, to bring us back to present, the BART surveillance cameras captured everything on this day. Cal watched the sisters come up the escalator at Concord, and then he stalked and followed them onto the train. He sat right across from Nia, who was standing, not sitting, because as her sister Tashia later testified, Nia didn't like sitting on BART seats. She thought that they were dirty and poorly kept, and sadly, public transportation can be that way, so she just preferred to stand. Nia Wilson stood in that train car directly visible to the man that had been watching her, and his mind was dark and racing. For 6 stops, which was over the time span of about 30 minutes or so, Cowell stared at her. At times he would look directly at her, and sometimes he'd look away if they caught eyes, but he was completely fixated on her. They arrived at MacArthur Station at about 9:30 p.m. MacArthur is a transfer hub in the heart of North Oakland, and it is covered with surveillance cameras. It's well-staffed, and it's open to the public. The sisters stepped off the Concord Line train, preparing to get onto their next train, which is the one that was supposed to take them home that night. They stepped off completely unaware of what was about to happen, and that's when everything changed. At 9:36 p.m., John Lee Cowell made his move. Cowell moved through the crowd, and he was completely silent. There was no confrontation between him and the sisters, and no exchange of words at all, so there were 0 warning signs of what was happening. He pulled out a large knife that he had hidden under his clothes, and from behind he lunged at Nia Wilson and slashed her throat. In nearly the same motion, he turned and stabbed Latifah Wilson in the neck too. Then he just stood back and watched. He didn't even try to run away. He just stood at the top of the stairs and watched them suffering. Latifah, who was bleeding from her own wound, turned and looked directly at him in shock and horror as she saw him wiping off his knife and cleaning the blade. She was standing there in total shock, just staring at the man that had attacked them for no reason while her baby sister was dying. Tashaya had initially thought that Nia had tripped as they were stepping off the train because she didn't see Cowell's motion. Then she saw the blood on Nia's neck, and then she saw it coming from her mouth, and she could not believe what she was looking at. This was truly a nightmare. Latifah held Nia on that platform, and Latifah shared that in their final moments, Nia was confused and scared and yelling, "Tifa, Tifa, Tifa," and she said, "I've got you, baby," as she passed away in her big sister's arms. She wasn't worried at all about her own injuries at the moment. All she could do was hold her sister and try to comfort her. Nia Wilson died only 2 minutes after she was stabbed. Just 2 minutes. That's the entire length of time it took between the blade making contact and the moment that Nia Wilson stopped breathing. BART police officer Andre Roca responded to the platform at approximately 9:35 to 9:36 p.m., and he found the two women down with stab wounds, and he began chest compressions on Nia. He did everything that he could until the paramedics arrived. Nia Wilson was pronounced dead at the scene at only 18 years old, and Latifah was transported to a nearby hospital. But as always, before we get into what happened next, I want to pause here to go over Nia's autopsy so that we can get an understanding of what happened to her and why she passed so suddenly. Nia Wilson's body arrived at the Alameda County Coroner's Office straight from the crime scene, and the wound documented in Nia's case was a throat incised wound from a slashing or cutting motion rather than a thrust. The forensic pathologist who testified at trial later described that laceration as about 2 inches deep. Now, 2 inches sounds small until you understand the anatomy that lies within the 2 inches of the neck surface. At that depth, the blade ran into and severed two of the most critical vascular structures in the entire human body, which are the carotid artery and the jugular vein. Her left side was impacted more severely than her right. The carotid artery carries oxygenated blood to the brain. It runs on both sides of your neck, going upwards toward the head, and the carotid has high pressure because it carries blood pumped directly from the left ventricle of the heart, which is the last place that blood moves through before it's forced through your entire body. So that portion of the heart is very strong. When you sever an artery that is powered by the left ventricle, blood does not come out slowly, it jets. This means that hemorrhaging begins the moment that that vessel is cut. Directly next to the carotid is the internal jugular vein, which is the largest vein in the neck, responsible for draining deoxygenated blood from the brain back down to the heart. The carotid artery and the internal jugular vein are in direct contact on both sides. A deep wound to the neck, reaching 2 inches in depth, has an extremely high probability of encountering both of those vessels at the same time. In Nia Wilson's case, both of them were cut. That is worst case scenario possible when we're talking about a neck injury. You're losing blood from the arterial system, so high pressure, high volume, and also from the venous system, draining blood from the brain. The body's ability to compensate is completely overwhelmed in an instant because there is nowhere for blood to go to or from the brain anymore, and there is no field intervention that could stop this kind of hemorrhage in a public setting. Even in a hospital with immediate surgical repair in an OR, survival would have looked grim. We know that Nia passed away within 2 minutes given what her sister and the officer saw. That number is not only plausible, but it's also sadly expected given that wound. In 2 minutes, a severed carotid artery and jugular vein in a young, healthy 18-year-old would produce enough blood loss to drive irreversible hemorrhagic shock. The heart responds to falling blood pressure by working harder, but without enough blood to move through her body to pump, it's ineffective and emptying. The heart is beating against empty chambers basically until the heart just stops. When Officer Andre Roca arrived at that platform and started those chest compressions, he was performing CPR on a young woman who had already lost an unsurvivable amount of blood. But CPR cannot bring back the blood that she had lost. So without much circulating blood, you're essentially doing chest compressions on an empty heart. As far as defensive wounds go, there were none found because she had no chance to even respond to what was coming her way. This whole case is deeply disturbing. But the fact that Nia and Latifah were both caught completely off guard is sickening. The official cause of death was sharp force injury to the neck, specifically the transection of the carotid artery and jugular vein, which resulted in fatal hemorrhage. The manner of death was, of course, homicide. That's exactly what's written on her death certificate and the forensic pathologist report as well. We know that Latifah Wilson was also stabbed in the neck that night and she survived. The details about the specific depth of her wound weren't released, but Latifah's wound was serious enough to require emergency hospitalization and transport. What is worth mentioning, though, is how lucky she was to have survived the attack. The difference between Latifah's wound and Nia's was just the difference of life and death by millimeters, possibly. Latifah Wilson carries that feeling with her every single day. Her physical wounds may have healed, but her broken heart and mental anguish that she has suffered because of what happened haven't. And that's why I always say that in these cases, there is no such thing as true justice, because nothing can erase the loss of trauma that everyone involved has endured. Now, to go back to the investigation and what happened just moments after the attack, after watching the sisters fall, Cowell ran. He fled through an emergency exit door and then into the MacArthur Station parking structure. Surveillance cameras captured him there, stripping off his pants and sweatshirt, then changing into different clothes, which was a deliberate act to alter his appearance. He really thought that he could outsmart and outrun the police at this point. When BART officers responded to the scene and rushed toward the platform, Cal ran right past them in the opposite direction, pointing his thumb back towards the station as if he were a terrified bystander trying to run away from the danger. Officer Roca later testified that he had only realized sometime later that one of the people that were pointing him towards the platform was Cowell himself. I'm still surprised that he was able to successfully exit that station without being arrested, but let me know if you found that surprising too. MacArthur Station was shut down immediately after the attack, and officers sealed off the platform and all surrounding areas. BART's cameras at MacArthur Station captured the attack from multiple angles, so there was no room for excuses when everything had been caught on camera before, during, and after the murder. Crime scene investigators processed the platform, the parking structure, and the surrounding area, and they recovered several critical pieces of physical evidence. The knife used in the attack was found at a construction site that was next to the station, and this was brought into the trial courtroom where jurors were actually allowed to examine and hold it themselves. Cowell also dumped his backpack, which was found in the parking structure, and they found that he had thrown out his sweatshirt and pants there too. Witness statements from people present on the platform and in the station were taken, and many of them saw Cowell wiping the blade after the attack. But the police didn't even really need their word for that because that was all corroborated by the surveillance footage too. There is no excuse that even the best defense attorney could come up with to shut down something that horrifying when it was literally captured on camera. The specific type of knife that he used, by the way, ended up being a large kitchen knife. The fact that Cowell had been carrying around this kitchen knife under his clothes for the entire train ride after choosing to take it out of his backpack clearly shows us how premeditated all of his actions were that night. The BART police chief said at a press conference the following morning, "This was, in my close to 30 years of police experience, probably one of the most vicious attacks that I've ever seen." He described it as comparable to a prison yard assault with how calculated, sudden, and ferocious this whole attack was. By Monday morning, BART investigators had assembled a comprehensive profile of their suspect from the surveillance footage, witness statements, and what they found in his backpack. They had a face and a name, and that name was John Lee Cowell. BART police released images from the surveillance cameras to law enforcement agencies and to the public because even though they knew exactly who they were looking for, they needed help locating him because he didn't have a residence or job to track him down at. This plan worked incredibly fast. Just 21 hours after the attack, a BART rider on an Antioch-bound train recognized Cowell from those pictures and immediately called the police through an anonymous tip. He was literally found in the same place that he stole Nia's life. John Lee Cowell was arrested at Pleasant Hill BART station at 6:27 p.m. on July 23, 2018. He was transported to the Santa Rita jail in Dublin and booked that evening on charges of first-degree murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and violation of parole. He was held without bail, and his arraignment was scheduled for July 25th, but it was postponed to August 22nd. Now, Typically, I try to summarize the legal portion of every case simply because I'm no law expert. However, mental health plays a significant role in everything that's about to happen now, so I'm going to be covering a little more than I usually do in this case. On August 22nd, 2018, prosecutors in Alameda County added a serious legal allegation to this case called murder while lying in wait. This means that the person is accused of hiding their true intentions while watching and waiting for the right moment and then carrying out a surprise attack. Because of this added charge, if Cowell were convicted, then the sentence would automatically be life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors decided not to seek the death penalty, and the road from the very beginning of this trial was long and complicated because of Cowell's mental health history. Alameda County Superior Court Judge James Kramer suspended criminal proceedings against Cowell, ruling that he found substantial evidence that the defendant was mentally incompetent to stand trial. The judge felt that he was unable to understand the proceedings against him or to assist in his own defense. This was devastating to Nia's family. Because of this, 3 separate court-appointed psychiatrists evaluated Cowell over the following year. In July 2019, after the 3rd evaluation, the court surprisingly found Cowell competent so he could stand trial in the eyes of the expert. Cowell entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, and this created a 2-phase trial. In the first phase, the jury decides whether or not he's guilty. In the second phase, the same jury would decide the legal question of sanity. They had to ask themselves, was the defendant legally insane at the time, meaning incapable of understanding what he did, and could he comprehend that it was morally or legally wrong? If found not guilty by reason of insanity, then he would be committed to a state psychiatric facility. The trial of John Lee Cowell finally began on Wednesday, February 5th, 2020, in an Oakland courtroom that was packed with Nia Wilson's family, supporters, media, and the public. It lasted about 5 weeks, and it was extremely painful for the family to endure. Less than 2 minutes into the prosecutor's opening statement, so the very start of trial, Cowell erupted with rage in the courtroom. Prosecutor Ford had just started showing surveillance pictures of Cowell and the Wilson sisters entering Concord BART station and said that Cowell had been following them, which is true, but apparently that triggered an outburst. Cowell started yelling, and Judge Heimer had to order him to be removed from the courtroom. After Cowell's removal, Ford laid out what he called a tactical surprise attack. This was a man who had stalked 3 women for more than half an hour on the train and then attacked without warning the moment that he had an escape route. He also talked about his behavior afterward, including the clothing change, the weapon disposal, pointing the officers away from him, and more. He argued that every step Cowell took after the stabbing showed that he understood exactly what he was doing. He was working deliberately to avoid accountability for it, too. Cowell's defense attorney, Christina Moore, opened by admitting that John Cowell killed Nia Wilson, but then turned to the question of why. She said, "What occurred was a tragedy. John Cowell acted because of his delusional misinterpretation of the world, not because he is evil." She also told the jury that Cowell had been suffering from active psychotic episodes in the weeks leading up to the attack, that he had stopped taking his antipsychotic medications because the voices were telling him that the pills were poisonous. She also said that his attack on the Wilson sisters was driven by the paranoid delusion that they were alien gang members who had kidnapped and tortured his grandmother. She said that he was deeply paranoid and that he refused to cooperate with defense-appointed doctors because his paranoia extended to not trusting anyone who came in to examine or even help him. Christina Moore said that this made building a defense for him extremely difficult and that this was going to be a very challenging trial. On the first day of trial, the prosecution called 3 BART employees as witnesses to the stand. There was a BART technician who walked the jury through the entire technical process of retrieving and preserving surveillance footage from the cameras. Then there were 2 BART police officers. One of them talked about the videos as well, and the other talked about finding the kitchen knife from the construction site near the MacArthur Station the day after the attack. On the second day of trial, former BART police officer Andre Roca responded to the emergency medical call. He heard screaming, and then he saw passengers running away from the station. He also heard someone say that there was a man with a knife, and he ran to the platform with his partner. He turned right, and that's where he found 2 women bleeding on the ground. He split from his partner so that they could each help one of the victims, and he went to Nia Wilson. He looked at her and knew how serious her injuries were, but he still spoke to her. even though she didn't respond. She was on her back against the railing, bleeding profusely from the left side of her neck. He lowered her and began the chest compressions and continued until the paramedics arrived. She never woke back up or spoke to him again, and this was a highly emotional moment at trial. He said he attempted to keep her heart beating. Then body cam footage of the video of Cowell pointing police in the wrong direction was also played. They also played and then replayed the stabbing in slow motion, and this was so painful to watch that people in the gallery had to get up and leave the courtroom. I could not imagine watching it even once, let alone over and over again. On Monday, February 10th, both of Nia's sisters bravely took the stand. Nia Wilson testified first. She talked about the train ride, Nia standing because she disliked the seats, the moment of the attack, the thought that Nia had tripped, the blood on her hands, the blood on her neck, and the blood coming from her mouth. She said that she was in shock and she didn't even understand what she was seeing. Then Latifah Wilson took the stand. The 26-minute unedited train video was played while she was up there, and the courtroom was silent for all 26 minutes. Latifah, 2 years after the night that her baby sister died in her arms, had to watch surveillance footage of the man who killed her sitting across from Nia on a train and staring at her. Latifah broke down. She became physically sick, and the prosecutors had to ask for a recess. She had to be helped out of the courtroom, and when she returned, she said, "That was my little sister, and I'm always supposed to protect my little sister." She talked about still having pain from her neck wound, and she became overwhelmed and sick again, so Ford had to ask for another break. I understand that her testimony is powerful and she deserves to speak her truth, but knowing that she was deeply traumatized and still got back up there just breaks my heart for her. I wish that there was a safer way for victims and families to experience court and the whole justice system, but sadly, she had to take the stand. On Tuesday, February 11th, 2020, John Lee Cowell's defense attorney convinced him to come back to court and take the stand in his own defense. As all of us true crimers here know, this is risky, especially for someone with a mental illness, but my best guess is that his defense attorney was hoping that he would demonstrate truly how mentally ill he really is on the stand to support the insanity plea. He was robotic on the stand, though. He stared straight ahead and showed no emotion at all. He testified about his psychiatric diagnoses and said that he was schizophrenic and he had depression and he had bipolar disorder. He also testified about hearing voices and describing them as alien voices. He talked about radio transmissions that he was receiving and that people that he saw were wearing fake skin, so their human appearance was just a disguise. Then he testified about July 22nd. He said that the Wilson sisters were not 3 young Black women that were going home on a train. They were aliens and members of a gang that had kidnapped his grandma and were torturing her. He said that he believed he needed to rescue her, so he took a large knife from his backpack, hid it under his clothes, and then stabbed 2 of the sisters on the platform. He admitted it, but then he said, "I don't have any responsibility for the 3 female gangs' behavior at all." Then prosecutor Ford cross-examined him. Cal became agitated and increasingly irate because Ford said that about 1 hour after murdering Nia Wilson, Cal hopped on an AC transit bus and that he called a Black female passenger a racial slur, then he attempted to fight her. The courtroom gasped. Members of Nia's family were in total shock too because they didn't know about this. Ford used this moment to support his theory that a man in a psychotic break does not, just 1 hour later, target another Black woman on a city bus, call her a racial slur, and then attempt to fight her because of her race. The only difference this time is that he had gotten rid of his weapon, so he had no way to attack her. That's why he tried to fight her. Cal became more and more agitated. He yelled at Ford and called him disrespectful. Then he was once again escorted out of the courtroom by deputies. He never returned again. After 5 weeks of trial, the jury deliberated for only 3 hours. On the afternoon of Tuesday, March 10th, 2020, they returned their verdict. John Lee Cowell was guilty of first-degree murder of Nia Wilson and guilty of premeditated attempted murder of Latifah Wilson, and the special circumstance of lying in wait were found to be true. Now, that same jury needed to decide if Cowell was legally sane at the time of the attack or not. The jury had been 11-1 in favor of finding him sane, not insane. Judge Heimer at the time was in a crunch, though, because the whole world was in a shutdown, and that included the courts too. So he took a rare step and issued a directed verdict himself, ruling that Cowell had been legally sane when he murdered Nia Wilson. The insanity defense had failed, so Cowell would now go to state prison and not a psychiatric facility. Let me know what you think about this. At the virtual sentencing, Latifah Wilson said, quote, "Even though it's been 2 years, it's still fresh to me. It still seems like yesterday, and it's hard to talk about sometimes without getting choked up. I can't forgive you for what you've done. You are inhuman. I can't forgive you for that. I have to give you for the peace of my family." End quote. She then said that she's serving a life sentence too, but that there's peace knowing that he's not going to walk free anymore. Tashia Wilson said, "You took our baby," and that she was afraid to leave the house now and had constant nightmares about what happened that night. July had always been her favorite month, and now she can't even look at it the same. Ansar al-Mohammed, Nia's father, said, "My daughter was everything to me. She was so beautiful, so inspirational, and had dreams. I'm supposed to be planning her graduation, not her funeral." Cowell attended this virtual sentencing, and he chose not to make any statements. Judge Heimer sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and the Alameda County DA's office released a statement that said, "Today brings to close one of the most tragic murder cases in recent memory. The horrific killing of Nia Wilson and the assault on her sister will haunt her family, loved ones, and our community forever. Mr. Cowell will now serve the remainder of his natural life in prison." Cowell was transferred to San Quentin State Prison for processing before permanent placement in a California state correctional facility. Cowell's attorney tried to file an appeal, but luckily that didn't go anywhere, and John Lee Cowell still remains incarcerated for life. After the trial, the Wilson family filed a civil lawsuit against BART. The suit mentioned 3 main failures. First was the payment confrontation on July 18th, 4 days before the murder, which placed Cowell on the officers' radars, but no action was taken. Second was Cowell's prior arrest at BART Station. And last but not least was the unreported threats against 2 other passengers just 2 weeks before the murder, which went undocumented because no BART employees were available to take that report at the time. The family argued that because of all of this, Cowell's violence was predictable, and the failure to act on the available information was on BART. They were seeking compensation for Nia's death, Latifah's injuries and lasting pain, the emotional trauma to the family, and structural improvements to BART's safety infrastructure. I wasn't able to find an outcome for the suit anywhere online, so it could still be ongoing, or they may have settled outside of court. On February 27, 2019, Nia's father also created the Nia Wilson Foundation. Its mission focuses on counseling services, housing support, and employment resources for young men and women. This addresses some of the systemic failures that led to John Lee Cowell being released from that psychiatric facility with nowhere to go, no treatment, no housing, and no follow-through just 75 days before he murdered an 18-year-old girl on a train platform. The fact that Nia's family chose to start a foundation in helping people like Cowell to get help tells us so much about their character. The world could learn a thing or two from their level of compassion, forgiveness, and kindness. Nia Wilson's memorial was held on August 3rd, 2018 at their local church in East Oakland. 18 doves were released as a symbol for her life, and her casket traveled to its final resting place in a horse-drawn carriage. Her name was spelled out in flowers in front of her casket, and more than 1,000 people marched through the streets of Oakland in the days after her death, chanting her name to celebrate and honor her life. I pray that Nia is resting peacefully, that Latifah is finding strength and comfort, and that Nia's family all feel peace and healing after such a tragic and devastating loss. Thank you so much for spending time with me today and listening to Nia's story. Please be sure to take great care of yourselves this week, nurse's orders, and don't forget to drop our butterfly secret handshake in the chat. I'll see you next weekend. Bye.